I'm out on the lake, and it was absolutely dead calm. I mean, there wasn't a wrinkle on the water. There was not a puff in the air. Normally, there's crows and other birds and other situations making noise, but nothing was going on. Out of nowhere, in the big timber, we're talking old growth, big stuff, a tree came crashing down for no reason. Absolutely no reason that I could figure out, and it kind of made me wonder what the heck was going on there. And I started to get out of the canoe, and I thought, this is not very smart. I think I'll just let this situation simmer and go the other way. And I've had that premonition a couple of times, and I'm kind of wondering if those are the kind of warnings or situations that come across on a different level that says, Jack, you need to just go home and be done with it.
I'd like to welcome Jack to the show. Jack has been featured a couple times on the Salish Sasquatch channel. Good friends that we both have, Jonathan and Sarah Brown. Great channel. Check it out if you haven't already. And they connected us, and Jack was gracious enough to accept my invitation to come on and share his story and some of the stories he's heard along the way in this crazy world of Bigfoot. Jack, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and thank you. Appreciate the welcome.
Yeah, of course. So, why don't you get things started off by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm one of them older guys. I'm 79, and if you count the gestation period, I'm 80. You get the idea. I'm getting up there. I've had a world and a lifetime of experiences, and it's been fun. Been a lot of fun. And my sweetheart and I, Arla is her name. I know there's another Arla in the Bigfoot mix out there. But anyway, we've been together for, 56 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the same person. Amazing. That's a credit to her, not to me. When I came home from Vietnam in 7 rather, I courted my sweetheart, and we got married in 1968. 67 home, 68 got married, and started on that life's journey. And it's been good, been very good for me. I don't know if it's germane to the conversation, but I became a believer, and I'm not just a Bigfoot believer. I was there before that, but Christian, and so I've kind of patterned my life around that philosophy and that's part of what it takes to be who I am. Way back, I remember 19-cent burgers, fries, and Cokes, and 19-cent gas, gallon of gas. So that's almost just right fresh off the ark. If you know what I mean. We raised a couple boys, and one of them is an adopted son from Vietnam, half Vietnamese and half adventurous soldier. Good men. They're just good men, and it's been a pleasure to have them. And when I started on the Bigfoot thing, it was a little later in life, in a sense, because you know how it is. You're raising a family and trying to make things work, and you haven't got time for a lot of the extraneous things that you'd like to pursue. I didn't even know I liked to pursue them originally, except that in 1962, now that goes back previous, my aunt and her folks had the Fort Bragg incident, we call it, and we'll get into that here in a couple of minutes. But anyway, that's where I come from as far as that part of my life is concerned. Been good. I don't complain. I've been a hunter all my life up until the last few years, and I can no longer hunt, get out there like I want to and do those things. And I find it very interesting in one respect. For all the time that I've been out hunting, there have been a few times when something told me, don't go here. And I don't belong here. And I'm not afraid of bear, of cougars, and all the other paraphernalia that lives out there. But after some rethinking and some adding in and out of different situations, I've come to the conclusion that I've been a lot closer to Mr. Bigfoot than I realize. And of course, have got all kinds of stories that I've collected over the years, and that type of thing. So yeah, I've been around that rascal, and I know of him well. I don't know if anybody really knows the guy. I want to start right out by saying that I go back and forth on whether it's just another animal, or if it's what as Meldrum would say, a relic hominid, or something in between. I don't know that any of that has really been nailed down. So I kind of go back and forth. Don't want to insult anybody. I just am what I am, and I say what I say, and it comes out that way.
I mean, I'm the same way. I think anybody that really has looked into this at any great depth and spent time doing it kind of goes back and forth between different possibilities all the time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, I've got a list of people whose books I've read, and this is just a small part of a long list. But I started out with John Green, and then Steenberg, Jeff Meldrum for sure, Bindernagel, Christopher Murphy, Kranz, Byrne, Robert Michael Pyle. I think he's more of a local guy here. And then lately, I finished up on with Matt Pruitt on his phenomenal Sasquatch, and I've got to say that there's only 2 or 3 books that I would hold up as stellar accounts of things going on, and Matt really shines for me. I really like the way he put things, and kind of nails it for me. I'm at this juncture, until I know different. I consider Mr. Bigfoot a biological entity, just like I am. Some people call me more animal than I need to be, but so that fits well. But anyway, so I tend to separate the phenomenal with the biological. And I know there's people that are solidly in other camps, and I think it's great. Go ahead, bring the evidence. We'll put it in one big bucket and come out with what he really is eventually. So what I collect, and then we'll get into it here. What I collect over the years are stories that, and I call them accounts, but they're stories of relationships that people have had, good, bad, or otherwise, with Mr. Bigfoot. And I've had the privilege of starting out on the positive. In other words, I didn't have any negative problems as far as Bigfoot are concerned. Some people do. I mean, they start out, the first words out of their mouth is, I don't believe it, it's a myth, and all that kind of stuff. And that's okay if that's what they want. But I started out with my aunt's folks, and that's where we'll get into this in just a second here. My aunt's folks, their accounting of in 1962 of Bigfoot. And I think, so far as I'm concerned, it's an account of major importance, but not well, and I don't want to say advertised, but we're not well known up and down the Bigfoot community. So that'll be my opportunity to share, and hopefully we'll get somewhere with this.
You started at the position of, you personally knew family members that had encountered these things.
Absolutely.
I was raised by my great grandparents, and anything that they would have told me was gospel. Absolutely true.
There you go. Yeah, the Book of Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a much different position than starting out as a non-believer and encountering one of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And over the years, I started in 62. I was 16. So over the years, I've really heard not one argument to say that they aren't here. In fact, it's harder to prove the negative than ever would be the positive. So, like Grover Kranz said, he says, if there's only one and we know it for sure, I don't care how many accounts or history or experiences people have had, he's real.
Right.
And that's where I start too. So it makes it, it sure makes it easier. I guess I'll start with the 1962 one, because that's the anchor point for me. It's one of the most, I think, interesting uh, stories that I have out there, and I just happen to be privileged to be in the family when it was told. So I'm going to start out with reading a book. Just happened to pick it up last night. It's a book by Larry Canute of Alaska Bear Tales. But he's got one line in here that really kind of fits a situation that I think is appropriate for all of us, no matter where we're at in the Bigfoot community. And it says, unfortunately, sensationalistic accounts of man-bear encounters are often the public's main source of information on Bruins. Not only are these accounts exaggerated, but they instill unnecessary fears about the wilderness outdoor experience. Now, if you transpose that and put Bigfoot in there, I think that fits. We have an overlay of strange and weird stuff going on out there, and we look at Bigfoot rather through that lens. And I've had to a couple of times back up and say, now, what am I looking at? What am I thinking here as far as Bigfoot is concerned? In that, is he really that Mr. Ferocious, wants to rip our head off? Well, I'm sure there's a few out there that would do that. But in the main, if indeed they were as violent and capable as we are often led to believe, I don't think there be very many of us left.
If that is the case, if they are predators, so to speak.
Yeah.
The amount of people that have gone out into the woods by themselves, provoking these things as researchers, as investigators out there specifically looking for Bigfoot, going to areas where they've been seen, trying to elicit some sort of interaction with them. Nobody's ever been harmed or turned up missing. Everybody's come home, save for the 2 hunters recently in Washington that, succumbed to the elements, and a few stories here and there. But for the most part, you don't really have any stories like that.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And if you start on that premise that they're not that they're portrayed to be, and go at it from a different perspective, I think we're going to make a lot more headway in the final assessment, rather, of what they are and that type of thing. And this story here will shed some light on it as well. So, with all of that, 1962, it was February. It was a rainy, kind of a black on again, off again night, and is the setting for in Fort Bragg, California. And I know that there's a Fort Bragg back east, or was, but this is Fort Bragg, California, in the northern side of the state. Now, I was 16 when I first heard it. I never wrote a thing down. I just listened to my aunt's folks' story. They came from down there up here to Washington State to visit, and they brought their story with them and the account with them, and they sat down in our living room and went through it. And the only person that wasn't there was Uncle Bob, great Uncle Bob, I'll call him, but everybody else was there. And of course, I'm sitting there, a 16-year-old with a slack jaw, looking at listening to everything that's going on and absorbing all of this as much as possible. So my account might differ a little bit from what John Green wrote in his book, And he got into some of that on page 13, I think it is. And Bud and Angie Jenkins was their name, and Bob. I think McKendrick was Bob's name. I don't know why that's so, but anyway, so there's that. And Bud and Bob were truck drivers, long haul truck drivers, and they would leave from L.A. and travel all the way up to Canada. And the midpoint for them at that time was right around Fort Bragg. So they would swing in at night and camp out for a few hours before they jumped in the rig and went north, or south, vice versa, depending on which direction they were going. And this particular night, and Bud, or rather Bob, are you confused yet?
We'll try to keep track of it.
Okay, Uncle Bob would sleep on a couch in the front room, because they didn't have a special room for him and everything else like that. It was just a little kind of a bungalow, not house, with a fence around it and a chicken coop and whatnot in the backyard. And anyway, he would sleep on there. And then in the middle of the night, Angie, Bud's wife, she had to get up, go to the bathroom. And apparently the clouds were sifting in and out, and there was a moon kind of in between. And as she's going through the living room toward the bathroom, she looked out her front room window, and here's this bear. She was convinced it was a bear at the time. It crawled over the fence and was getting in her garden. And if you know anything about bears and ladies and gardens, you know that bear was in trouble. Anyway, so she ran back to the bedroom and told Bud to get the shotgun. There's a bear in my garden. And so he's looking for the shotgun, which she had moved. And then he has to look for the shells, which they never did find. And which I'm thankful for, quite frankly. But in the hubbub, in the chaos, Bob got up and said, "What's going on?" And she told him, and he said, "Oh my goodness, I'll just run out there and yell at it. It'll go away. No big deal." So he goes out through the front room door and to do what he needs to do. And in the meantime, Bud comes out and says, "Where's Bob?" Well, he's down around the corner of the house or something. He's yelling at the bear. So they both walked up to the front room door, and there's a screen door, kind of an alcove type of thing. Anyway, it was the front door, and they look down the sidewalk, and here's Bob. He's on his hands and knees crawling back into the house. and right behind him, literally right behind him, was this tall, 8-foot tall Bigfoot. Now, they didn't know that by name what a Bigfoot was. They had never encountered such a thing, knew nothing about it. It was all brand new experience, absolutely new. But Bob is crawling in. He crawls in the door of the house, and as he gets there, Bud and Angie, of course, they're in shock themselves. They don't know what's going on. They both are hanging onto the screen door, and they want to shut the screen door. Well, the Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call him, he walks right up there. He was there, and he was bent over to look inside the place. And the door frames on those were 78 inches, I think, standard. It might be an inch or two different, but that's pretty standard. So it had to bend over quite a ways to look in. And they're looking at each other across the space of a couple of feet. I mean, they're right there where they can count the cavities in his teeth. And the animal had that look on his face of just super curiosity all over him, and going through the motions there, and bent over and everything else like that. Well, at that particular point, Bud and Angie weren't curious at all. They just went away. And their curiosity was gone. They're trying to shut the door, and it wouldn't shut. And the screen door wouldn't shut. They couldn't understand what was going on, and they're in this state of shock and any number of things of that nature. And so pretty soon they got wise, and they just backed away and shut the main door. And after they shut the main door, the animal stood there for a couple of seconds, few minutes, whatever. I don't know. Didn't have a stopwatch on it, and I wasn't there. But then it turned and left, and it faded off into the dark, and it was gone. Well, they called the sheriff out of Fort Bragg and told him what had gone on. And that was about 4 a.m, I guess, all this transpired. And so they're waiting there for the sheriff to come out, which didn't take very long. And it was fading to daylight. It was beginning to get daylight anyway. And poor Uncle Bob, he couldn't hold a cup of coffee for about half an hour. He's shaking so bad. And anyway, they came out. They took some plaster casts of the feet and took the information down, and this, that, and the other thing. And I'm not 100% sure they believed everything. It'd be pretty hard not to believe a family like that caught in that situation. I mean, you may not know what to make of it, but believing that they had the encounter was very real.
Sure.
And that type of thing. So within a day or two or something, I don't know exact time frame, but there was a professor, Edward, I think is his name, out of Ashland, Oregon, which is, due north there a bit. And I think he was an art professor. Some of those things are very vague, but they're known. And if you want more information, if you want specific information, you could get a hold of Daniel Perez of Bigfoot Times or Cliff Barrickman. They've got a copy of the handprint inside the museum there. I've seen it three different times and all. But anyway, he came down and he traced the hand on the print that was left on the door sill. Apparently, it was pretty muddy enough. What do you call it? Dirt on the hand of the print to make a pretty good print out of it. And from the heel by the wrist to the top of the farthest finger, it was 11.5 or 11.75 long.
Wow.
Yeah, I've heard that they have some massive hands, and I believe it. But anyway, that's the length of the hand, and that was impressive enough all by itself. So anyway, that happened, and I've been told that somebody said, well, they tracked it for 5 miles. Well, if you've been listening to any of the Bigfoot accounts, tracking a Bigfoot for 5 miles in anything but snow is just about an absolute impossibility. They may have found another track somewhere 5 miles out, but they didn't track it that far, I don't think. But anyway, that's the upshot of that whole situation, and it's been written up and talked about, and I listened to it with rapt attention. I'll tell you.
I bet. Were they there to tell the story specifically? Is that why they were visiting?
They didn't come up there saying, let's go talk to the folks. My folks, but they came up because my aunt and my Uncle Ollie, they lived close to us up here. When they came up to visit, and it wasn't very long afterwards that they came up and made the extra special to come over to the house and tell the story. And I was very, very glad that they did, because that's been kind of a high water mark in our family.
I can imagine so. How did they present it to you? And because back then, I mean, like you're saying, Bigfoot wasn't even a thing yet.
No, it was getting to be a thing, obviously, but yes, they said we had an account. This is what happened, and somebody had told them by that time that this was supposedly a real thing in California, and this, that, and the other thing. So they were getting educated real quick. Let's put it that way.
I bet.
Yeah, and one of the things I forgot to tell. Well, I didn't forget. I actually held back on telling Jonathan and Sarah about this part because I really wasn't sure of it myself. And that's when Bob went out to chase the bear off. He stuffed his face right in the chest of this animal.
Ran right into it.
Right into it, and I thought, that I don't believe that. That's hard to believe. I mean, that's a little bit of hyperbole, and this, that, and the other thing. But after I had the conversation with Jonathan and Sarah about what had happened, I made a phone call to one of my cousins, my Aunt Shirley's son, and I asked him about that. I says, "No, is that just add on? Is that hyperbole, drama, whatever?" He says, "Oh no, that actually happened. It's the real McCoy," which is apparently one of the reasons that he came crawling back in. And I think that between that and the fact that the animal never made a move that was that could have been construed as vicious or mad or mean or whatever, and it still had its presence of mind, whatever that is, to come up to the door and look inside the house full of curiosity. That's one of the reasons that I am convinced they're not what we think they are. There's a little bit more to them than that, and I've always, so anyway, they validated that, and I said, "Are you sure?" He says, "Oh no, we've all talked about that exact same thing for years." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to let that information out." And but I didn't want to throw something out there that nobody would willing to buy into. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I was looking for clarity, not chaos, and the real as opposed to false. So all of that has to fit into that matrix of the story. And what I would give or have given to been a little closer and have taken the time. Now, today we use BFRO and other research people, and they would ask different questions and they would ferret out different lines of inquiry and maybe add or subtract from the story in a different way. But that's the gist of the story as it was told to me. And I feel honored and complimented in a very real way that these folks that I know, and they weren't given to storytelling anyway. My Aunt Shirley says, now Bud might exaggerate a little bit, but my mom, she wouldn't. If it was black, it was black. If it was white, it was white, and there's nothing in between. So, and she told the story just like the rest of them. And I will say that their eye size must have went up a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, there may not have been a good order there for a while either. Well, the rest of that story, which rarely gets told, it hardly if at all, is that over the next couple of weeks, things settled down, of course, and they saw the footprints in the garden and yada, yada, yada. But over the next couple of weeks, Bud noticed that the dog food was going down way too fast. He had a 50-pound bag of dog food and opened the top of it and to feed the dogs. And I don't know what the dog's response was to this critter around the place. I never heard anything about that, or if I did, I forgot. But anyway, it went down from full open down to half in almost overnight. Mm-hmm. So that was very uncommon. And somebody else said, well, a bear could get in there and not bother anything. Well, not really. A bear would just strew that stuff all over the place. I've hunted bear myself for years, and bear are not good housekeepers by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, so there was that. And they also had on as you walked in the door, there was the 2x4, part of the 2x4 structure. They kept a egg carton, and they would take eggs off the hands and put them in there. And If it was 2 or 3 eggs, they just leave it. When it got up to 8, 9 eggs, 10, a dozen, whatever, they would take that into the house and replace the egg carton. Well, they noticed that the bud went out one time, and there was a half a dozen eggs in there, and he walked out there the next day, and there was none. I mean, yeah, none, cleaned out. He kind of wondered what was going on, but he looked around, and there was no shells on the floor. The eggs were just missing, vanished. As time went on, I mean, it was a short time, within a couple of weeks, there was an occasional Bigfoot track that they either hadn't noticed or showed up fresh. They weren't sure. So that told them that whatever this critter was, he's hanging around a bit.
Yeah.
And Angie, because Aunt Shirley's mom, because she's there alone, she'd had enough. And so they either, I don't know if they were renting the place or bought it or whatever, but they made an effort to get out of there and go somewhere else. And that was the end of that whole chapter. But I always thought that was an interesting tag on to the original story.
There's a lot of interesting details in that story.
Oh boy. Yeah.
I understand if you don't know the answer to this, but do you happen to know what kind of produce was in the garden?
Oh, it's California, Northern California. So and out toward the coast. So it could be just about anything. There could be tomatoes, cabbage, just about anything. Just about anything. I don't know anything about what they actually had in there, but that was part of it.
Yeah, I was just curious about, what specifically it was after in the garden.
I think it was just a pass through.
Yeah.
It was the fence was I think, if I'm not mistaken, the fence was like 6 feet tall, a regular cedar board fence where it went over the top. Didn't go over. I don't know if it went over the top or not. That's a good question.
So there's been situations, and we'll get back to it, but I just want to take a break here for a second because I've known people personally, a woman researcher down in Texas. Her husband at the time, whenever I met her, was a long haul truck driver. And Bigfoot was coming up around her house whenever he would leave town. That was something I was told and observed personally at a very early time whenever I got into Bigfoot. And over the years, there's been numerous cases where, for whatever reason, husband's gone for a while, no men are around, and Bigfoot starts coming up around the house. That's not something these people would have known about. That's not something, that would really get picked up on all that much. But then you have a situation, like you're saying, where she was alone at the house a lot of time. And that might have made the Bigfoot feel more secure about coming up that close to the house or whatever and taking advantage of like the dog food and the eggs and the garden and everything else. And then one of the first things that popped in my mind while you were telling the story was the Bigfoot's behavior, the curiosity and everything. And why would it act that way? And why was Uncle Bob crawling on his hands and knees? And so running into it like that, sounds totally believable because it explains those aspects of the story. It explains why he's on his hands and knees like that, poor Uncle Bob. It explains why the Bigfoot might have followed him back to the house and been like, what is going on here? A human just ran into me. One of those little hairless things just hit me. So it's all just really fascinating. And to have heard that at the age of 16 from your own family members sitting around like that must have been amazing. I can only imagine what was going through your head.
Yeah, it was amazing. Jaw-dropping, quite frankly. And my stepdad, my mom at the time, till the time of their death, they always said, "Oh, I can't believe that. I can't believe that." I mean, when you get it stuck in your mind that that's what you're going to believe or not believe, you normally stay there, which is kind of unfortunate.
Yeah.
My stepdad, he lived in the woods all the time. I mean, he grew up in the woods, cut wood, did all kinds of things and hunted. He was an extremely good hunter and that type of thing. And he said, "Oh, I've never had a problem. I've never had that kind of a situation." Well, I wonder how many times we just erase that out of our mind, even if we did have this situation, a strange noise, a tree being pushed over, a rock being thrown, and you don't know where it comes from, so you kind of dismiss it. You're thinking it must have fell off a overturned stump or any number of things,
Sure. It must have been this.
Yeah, exactly. They make up their mind before they make up finish out the information. And so anyway, but I have been fortunate that when they told the story, I believed the story. I didn't question it at all. But let me add a little bit to what you're saying, because I think that this is a fascinating sideline on it. There's my wife and I built an off-grid home out of a little place on the west side of Packwood, Washington, which is also the west side of Highway 12 and White Pass. Anyway, we had an off-grid home. And above our place, the Forest Service road that we lived on went up an additional 13 miles to the top, made a hook. There's a little lake up there, and it's just beautiful country, and definitely wilderness all the way from my back door to the end of it was wilderness. And there's a place up there where the road runs tight along kind of a rock wall. If you're coming down, it would be on the left side, and for a couple hundred yards. And then on the right side of that, it just goes off into nothing with the bottom of a canyon. And we used to hunt up there all the time. And this gentleman from the area hunts up there an awful lot as well. And he was past that point going up. And when he came back down, that's the only way you can come. You either go by that or you don't. There's no other, you don't get an option. So he's coming back down the logging road, the Forest Service road, and in front of him, just past the wall, there's a Bigfoot. He's standing right smack in the middle of the road. He's a big guy, too, all of 8 foot or better. And he's not paying attention to this gentleman coming down the road because he's got something in his hand and he's sniffing it and going through those motions and tearing this thing apart and ripping it apart, and he is bellowing at the top of his lungs and just having a fit and that type of thing. So this gentleman, he's been all over those hills. He's never had an experience anywhere even close to this, and he's scared spitless, quite frankly. And I think I'm getting dry mouth just thinking about it. Anyway,
yeah.
Anyway, so he's stuck. There's no place for him to go. And after a bit, the animal realized that there was somebody else in the vicinity, which was him, only a couple hundred yards away. And he drops what he has in his hand and took a couple steps and went over the bank down into no man's land. And that was it. Well, the guy got himself together, and he starts driving down the road, and he looks down. He was wondering what was going on himself by that time. What had happened was there was a lady's feminine napkin that this thing had up on his face, and sniffing in the odor and everything else like that. And I don't think I need a lot of explanation about what was going on there, but it had lit him up, and that type of thing. Maybe he's looking for a date. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the upshot of the whole thing is, I think the gal's perfume, you might say, has accommodated and has gone along with any number of outings, other different situations, and ladies who have had, like you say, encounters around their home where men aren't around. So it's hard to say. I mean, that might be real far fetched, but whatever it was, this gentleman says, I ain't going there again. And which I think is kind of foolish, because the animals, they move on. It doesn't make any difference. But anyway, he had enough experience right there without going any farther than that. So
I mean, that was something that,
Yeah, that's a natural, I think, personally.
I was fortunate enough to hook up with people that were much older than myself and had been doing this for a long, long time before I even got started. And that type of information, theory, whatever you want to call it,
That's good enough.
Was pretty accepted and pretty well known and talked about, in circles. And it was only due to, changes in society and what was acceptable and not acceptable to say publicly. It kind of got stopped talking about, but that doesn't erase it. It doesn't make it go away. It doesn't make it any more untrue.
Exactly right. I mean, if you think about it, how much sense do I'm talking SCENTS do we take with us when we're hunting for game animals? The sense of the lady of the area and those types of things. And to me, it all makes sense. And over time, you hear all different kinds of things, and I don't need to get too carried away. But like you say, culturally, we're always in a state of change and flux and whatnot. So, yeah.
Sure. What have you experienced?
No, I've never had to wrestle one. Let's put it that way. And I've never actually even seen one, but I've been in a couple of different situations. Well, at the same road, it goes up, makes a hard hook to the right, and it's about the 4,500 foot level, which doesn't impress anybody from Colorado. But around here, it's the same height as White Pass, and there's a little lake there called Jackpot Lake. And I took my canoe up there, and I'm a fly fisherman and everything. Sometimes the only thing I catch is flies. But anyway, I'm out on the lake, and it was absolutely dead calm. I mean, there wasn't a wrinkle on the water. There was not a puff in the air. Even there was no. Normally, there's crows and other birds and other situations making noise, but nothing was going on. It was toward the evening. It was just before it really gets serious about getting dark, and out of nowhere on the other end of the lake. Now, this little lake was a pothole lake and probably 5 acres. Okay, but at the other end of it, in the big timber, and we're talking old growth, big stuff, and away from the lake itself came a tree came crashing down, and I know it was a tree, and maybe somewhere between 6 and 8-inch diameter at the butt, something of that nature, came crashing down for no reason. Absolutely no reason that I could figure out, and kind of made me wonder what the heck was going on there. So I paddled down to that end of the lake, and I was going to pull the canoe up on the shore and go up through the timber. It wasn't very far through there, and it's fairly open. And then the back side of it dropped off down to what's called Jackpot Creek, and at the far end, and that may be, I don't know, or some 800,000 feet below, but it was pretty well straight up and down. And I started to get out of the canoe, and I thought, this is not very smart. I think I'll just let this situation simmer and go the other way. And I've had that premonition a couple of times. Again, a bear or cougar no longer bothers me. You've been around them long enough that you know when to push and when to not push, and or I have anyway. And so I've kind of stayed away from them a little bit, but they don't bother me. I see bear. I consider a highlight of my evening to see a bear walk around in the area, or see cougar tracks or that type of thing. And so that they don't bother me. But there's always, I've said before, there's something else out there that definitely catches my attention. And I don't know if the Bigfoot, that's where I would call the infrasound or the growling or something of that nature that we can't pick up with our own ear. Shoot, I can't hear a bomb blast anymore. But those types of things. And I'm kind of wondering if those are the kind of warnings or situations that come across on a different level that says, Jack, you need to just go home and and be done with it. Also, at the same time, just down below that a little bit, there's a swamp. And when I'm coming back down, where it crosses the creek, and there is and they like water, and there's a stream that runs kind of through the edge of the swamp and out the backside down. And in the springtime, I go up there because I lived at the bottom of the road, so nobody would bother going up that road until there was enough spring, enough summer to keep the road open. I just go up there. I would be looking for bow making material and just to visit. Well, we also used to collect firewood up there too, so that was another reason to be up there before anybody in town got up there. So at least I would have my stuff marked. But anyway, I come across a couple of situations there where the scat on the edge of that swamp was of a diameter and size, let's put it that way, that you knew it was no common bear in there. And there was something much, much bigger than that. And I came across that in two different spots. And both of them had that same sensation that, Jack, you just don't belong here. And yet, at the same time, I go up there a week later, and that would not be there. The sensation would not be there. It would not bother me. I go right on through and do whatever I was going to do up there. So, and I think if you're sensitive to what's around you, and I developed that sensitivity, by the way, because I bow hunt with the old English longbow. I've done it for 30 some years, and that means you're by yourself if you're going to be effective at all. And I was very effective, almost too effective, but very effective with that. And so I had to pay attention to what was going around me on a different level than just blundering through with a red coat and a rifle.
Right.
You get the idea. Yeah. I mean, I'm watching for every little thing I could to detect. I wasn't looking for danger, but I was looking for animals or signs of things and whatever the case is. And that's often the case for me anyway, that I would bump into things that the average guy with a glow coat and a rifle would never see. They're not, they can shoot 200 yards or better.
Yeah.
Well, me, I kept my limits down to 20 or 30 yards max. And so I'd have to be pretty sensitive to what's going on around me. So with that, those things kind of disturbed me differently. And at the same area now, by the way, and I know of other people who have seen them up there, but the same area, there was a lookout up there during World War II. There was lookouts all over that country, and I could name a bunch of them, but I won't. But the ridge was called South Point, one of the highest little ridges in there, and it was right at about 6,100 feet where they put the lookout, and you could see a lot of country. Anyway, the upshot of that is that my wife and I went up there a couple of times and back, and never had a problem. It's quite a little hike. Come at it from a couple of different directions on two different trails. And then the next time we went up there, she looked at me, I looked at her, and I said, this ain't, and she said it first. She says, I don't think, this is not right. Something's haywire here. That it doesn't, I don't feel comfortable. And I said, well, I've had the same feeling. We're being watched or we're being whatever. And so we backed out of there. The next time we go back up there, it goes right through there like it was open season, no problem.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I've been around them, and I've been around all kinds of people. I've ferreted out any story or any experience people had. I want to know more about these critters and that type of thing. In the last few years, I've really kind of leaned into it. And like I said, after I got married, we're busy raising a family, and I don't have a lot of time and other interests and things of that nature take up the spare time, the slack time, and that type of thing. So I kind of stay away from that. But I've shared a lot of this with Sarah and John. She says I got tons of stories. Well, I'm down to pounds.
I'm just kind of curious, personally, is there a certain story or a couple that stand out in your own mind that you just personally like more than the others?
Yeah, this first one I told you, that's one of the very real things. Another one is I'll use the Amowich account, and I've said this one before, and I really like it because it impacted me as well as the other gentleman. I We lived in a little burg called Carbonado, and it's up in the hills, a little west of Mount Rainier National Park, kind of west central, you might say, and up on the Carbon Glacier and all that. It's just beautiful country. I used to mountain goat hunt in a close proximity to that. You can't hunt legally in the park. Period. End of the subject. But we'd always run the edges, and because the park itself is, I don't know how many square miles it is. It's pretty good, pretty good size. You got Mount Rainier plugged right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And the upshot of all of that is it's not only primitive and remote and that type of thing, but it becomes a sanctuary for any of the animals that live there. And so from time to time they'll come out. But anyway, I was leaving Carbonado, driving toward Puyallup, and that's a half-hour drive. And just as I left the town of Carbonado, I picked up a guy kind of looked half lost, and I normally don't pick up hitchhikers, and but this was years and years ago when that did seem to be quite as a problem. Anyway, I picked him up and we introduced each other who we were. I'd never met him before, and we're driving along, and he was a veteran like I am. He was a Vietnam veteran, although he apparently had some rougher times than I did. But anyway, and I says, "Well, where are you going? What are you doing? All that kind of stuff." And apparently, he had took a large cedar stump that was inside the park. Now, you're not supposed to have done this, but anyway, had a large stump inside the park that he had. The bottom of it was sort of hollow, so he finished hollowing it out and made a kind of a cabin out of it so he could stay there. And he managed to stay a couple of winters in that thing. I would have done that myself, but he needed to be alone, and that was his way of doing it. It's kind of a sanctuary for him. And so we got to talking about that. He brought in a crossbow. Well, crossbows were illegal, but he liked that because it was quiet and he could make sure he had meat. And so I didn't question it. That was his deal. And, but anyway, so we're driving along, and I asked him, I said, "Listen," I says, "what do you know about Bigfoot?" And I'll tell you what, and I've said this a number of times before, he went from a casual, open kind of a conversation. He just turned into a different man right there in front of me. He was two different people. He was dead serious when he got to that point of the conversation. And he says, "Well, I had one run-in with one." I said, "A run-in?" And he says, "Well, not really. I saw it." And I said, "Well, tell me about it." And he explained that he was on one little ridge that drops off into the canyon where his cabin was, or stump cabin, you'd call it what you want. Anyway, and he looked across the way, and he thought it was a bear. And he says, "I've seen lots of bear up there." And he did. I know he did. But anyway, because I used to hunt bear right off the edges of that myself. Anyway, he said it was kind of up against a stump, and it was eating berries, huckleberries. So it must have been in the fall of the year, late August, early September, before he had decided to go in for the winter. And he says it was so odd. It would reach out and actually take the berries and the limb and everything and eat it. And he says, I was fascinated because I hadn't seen a bear that was doing that, standing on its hind legs like that. And it was far enough away that it wasn't a real clear picture, apparently. And And he says, I watched it and watched it. And he says, all of a sudden, it senses, it knew I was looking at it. And it turned and looked right at me. And he says, it's just scared me spitless. And it gathered itself together and walked off toward the park, up into the timber. And he says, I watched it the whole way. It was not a bear. It was definitely a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch. And he says, I never went back to my cabin. That was it. He wouldn't take a chance on it. And I asked him, I said, well, do you think it meant you harm? He said, no, I don't think so. But I wasn't going to stay there and find out what was going on. He said, I couldn't handle it. And, I never caught the guy's, he told me his name, but I never caught the guy's name. We lived in Carbonado at the time. And apparently he was one of those pass-throughs that back and forth through there. But I always consider that one of my more fascinating Bigfoot stories because of not so much that he saw it, but how it affected him.
Yeah.
And his psyche was already damaged because of his war years, and I'm certain that didn't help. That didn't help at all. So I don't know whatever happened to him. It's been long enough. He's probably passed away or gone off into who knows where. But that was interesting. And then on the same edge of that park, I have a friend of mine whose son, I guess he was 18 or 19. I thought he was older at the time, but he wasn't, come to find out. But anyway, they were in there for an elk hunting trip. It's a large flat area. We used to go in there. I never hunted elk in there, but I did hunt deer in there because it was kind of a gathering spot for deer rather at that time of year. And the elk were in there all the time. Anyway, the upshot is, and the guy was a rifle hunter. They had bootlegged a camp in there, and they weren't supposed to do that. But a lot of things that we're not supposed to do get done, if you know what I mean.
Sometimes it happens.
That was an accident,
Yeah.
Anyway, just about the last little bit of a daylight in the fall, and there's a ground fog. And if you know anything about ground fogs, you kind of hover at a particular level, and you stick your head up over the top of it or down underneath it. It's just kind of a layer of fog in there. And he walked away from camp up this, we call it the water spur, and in there, and he says, well, I'm going to poke around and see if I can't find a bull. I don't think he was actually going to shoot anything because the season hadn't opened till the next day, but he was doing a little scouting just before dark, kind of wet his whistle on it, you might say. And he walked away from camp quite a little ways, and out of nowhere, he just happened to look up, and he's looking at an 8-foot animal standing there looking at him. It was a Sasquatch, and he again was not. That was the last thing on his mind, and I don't think he was versed in Sasquatch lore because that's some, I'd hazard a guess, 35 years, 40 years ago, maybe. He put the scope on it right away, and he was lining up on it, and he looked at it, and he couldn't, he had no reason to pull the trigger.
Right.
So he didn't. But on the one hand, on the other hand, it was so much different than what he expected. Was definitely not a bear. It was standing on its hind legs looking at him, and he looked at it long enough to know that he was in the company of something that was very uncomfortable. Let's put it that way. So he turned around to leave. He brought his rifle back to his side, turned around to leave, and he started to hurry off, and he realized this may not be a good deal. He should have walked backwards for a ways, and he turned around real quick, and it was just gone. And he's never been back. Never been back. Scared him spitless.
Wow.
And couldn't handle what he was looking at, and I feel bad for. That's the other thing too. We're not. If you see a bear in an uncomfortable situation, you know enough about bears to know that you can go right back in there later and not have a problem. You'll be watching for what's going on, but not necessarily a situation where you felt like you were in danger. But Bigfoot, because they're so rare, the sightings, so quick and so surprising, we don't get acclimated to them.
Right.
In other words, we don't have enough access to their face into what's going on, what they're thinking, how they're functioning, so that we can say, yeah, I can, I can be comfortable in the company of a Bigfoot, a couple hundred yards off. And this, that. I think Sarah and Jonathan are of that ilk. They have had enough exposure that they're not going to run up and bear hug one, but they're not going to be petrified or taken aback. And most of us have not had that. We haven't had that level of experience. You and I probably, if we see one once in a lifetime, we've seen one once in a lifetime, and it makes all the difference in the world. The first bear I killed, that was that experience. But after that, and others that I've taken over the years, they just don't affect me. I'm that way at all. And that includes cougar and other things. I've been up handshaking distance from any number of animals over the years, and because I know what they are, they don't affect me the same way as they would a newcomer. I take a neophyte out there and show him the bear for the very first time. He might have racing streaks in his shorts.
Yeah.
Because that's the first time. But the second or third time that it gets in, or after some, if he's with people who have had those experiences, things fall into place in a different level.
Oh, I'm sure if I were in a position where I saw a grizzly bear out in the wild, just in the woods with me or something, or standing on the other side of a meadow, I would be absolutely terrified, without a doubt.
Yeah, my wife and I went to Eastern Washington. We had two dogs with us. One was a mutt, and one of these little rat. They look like a rat.
Yep, I know the breed well.
The other one was my. And I say that fondly. The other one was a Labrador cross, and she was a young pup at the time. And we crossed a little patch of timber up on a ridge, and there was a bare spot. And at the other end of that, and I didn't have leashes on the dogs at all. And we're fat, dumb, and happy. And I looked up, and there's a big red-looking bear right out there, and everything else like that. And I got down on one knee real quick, and I called my dog back to me. She didn't see the bear, fortunately. And I got a hold of her. And to make a long story short, we made leashes out of what we had and decided to get out of there. And we didn't have a pocket knife between us. And if I did, I'd have cut my throat and handed the knife to my wife. because had it decided to do us in, we had no defense. And but anyway, so yeah, but I've seen lots of them since, and I watch what they do. They don't bother me that much. But a bear, again, is a whole lot different than a Sasquatch. The animals you rarely see always catch you by whatever.
Yeah.
So I'll see if I got anything else to add to the pile before you throw me out of my own house.
I mean, you're welcome to stay as long as you want, Jack.
We lived in a little bird called Kapowsin, and that's my next foray with Sarah and Jonathan, if they put up with me. And that's there's three different incidences there that I think are worthy of note. That was south of Tacoma, south of Graham, and then finally out south of Kapowsin itself, and close to the western corner of the park. We just happened to, why I don't know, but we just happened to gravitate to the park area when we moved around a little bit, and there was nobody there. I mean, when we first moved out there was nobody, and now it's kind of a metropolis, and it's kind of a shame to see that. But we knew the area very well, and again, I hunted by myself. I was all over the place there, trying to put footprints down in any number of places in there. and knew it very well. One of the few people that even did that, because nobody else would waste their time there, but it was productive for me. After we moved out, I heard there was a called Kapowson Air Sports, I think it is. They had a parachute drop zone at the end of the airport. And the airport was maybe less than a quarter of a mile from our house. That end of it and everything. Now, one of the guys had dropped a load of parachuters off and was coming in for a landing to pick up another load of. I call them idiots because there's no way I'd get out of a perfectly running airplane.
Yeah, my stepdaughter's one of those idiots, and I said the same thing. What is wrong with you?
I test in their bed sheets. I'm on the ground. But anyway, there's a lot of brush around that corner of the Berg. There wasn't any tall. There wasn't a lot of timber. There's alder trees. Every once in a while, by the way, you'd find a parachutist hung up in the alder trees, which is funny in its own right. Anyway, he's dropped down to get another load of parachuters, and just as he was dropping over the edge of the runway, he noticed a Bigfoot, and it was off in the brush a little bit, and making a beeline to get out of there. So he pulled the throttle back and made a big turn around there to go back, and by that time the Bigfoot had disappeared, gone.
Huh.
But that was right in our backyard. Another gentleman up there, he went out to check his fence line. Something was raising hob with everything he had, and it's pitch black. I don't think he even had a flashlight, and he's out there, an older fella, and something literally cuffed him hard. And it couldn't have been, I don't think it could have been a bear. And it wasn't an elk. There's a lot of elk in the area too. I don't think it was an elk or a deer because they don't have the means to cuff you. They can run over the top of you, I guess. But I kind of wondered about that. And that was about the same time that a state patrolman or a local sheriff, whatever, one of the two, had seen one cross the road as well, and that was very close to the same deal. So it makes you wonder, how many of these things are living in and around us that we not only don't see, we'll never see. And unless they make a strange move, we're not going to know that either.
I wanted to ask you, you've read so many books, and I'm sure you've heard the story of the rock apes of Vietnam. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a good place for them. Let's put it that way. I don't know, Matt. I really don't know. I'm kind of as curious about that as you are. I was not a frontline soldier. I was but I almost hate to say this, but I was a food inspector. That was my MOS in the service. And I was stationed in Saigon for a year, and I bought staples off the local economy, checked different ration breakdowns and all that kind of falderall. That was my job. And I was happy to leave it when I left. But as far as being out there where I, had exposure to that, I didn't. And I know nothing about it at all until recently. I read a few books and articles and whatnot on that. So that's as far as I can go there. I was attached to the veterinary. Our officers were veterinarians, and everybody underneath that were just like myself. We did the grunt work and this, that, and the other thing. So anywhere we were at, we had a veterinary clinic, even in Vietnam. And that's did I send you a picture of me holding a bear?
Yeah.
Cub bear?
Yeah, you did.
That's an Asian Asian bear cub. And, I like that little guy. I'd like to have been able to keep him, but he came in and they took him out. I don't know where he went after that, because we had pythons and you name it. Everything came through the clinic, and but I saw no monsters come through there, and nobody talked of them. I have no idea. Although I do have friends from high school that went in the service at the same time, ended up over there, and they did talk about tigers and things of that nature, but the rock apes or anything else like that, I have no idea.
I just always wondered if it was, something undiscovered, or if it was just a case of a bunch of Americans seeing something that they had never seen before and didn't know existed.
Or both.
Right.
Or a little bit of both. Yeah. I don't know. I believe in which always everybody wants evidence. Well, the first time you see a track in the mud is pushed down deeper than anything you could do, and it's obvious that it came from a living animal, I start to call that evidence in a hurry. I don't know how you can do it. There's some of us who, let me put it this way. Of all the books I've read, and I've read a pile of them, almost every one of them either starts or ends with if they're there, if there really are existence, if this, that, and that, the other thing. And I always started with they are there. So now let's get the rest of the information so we know what they are, instead of always dealing with the if. And I just think it's what's the deal? When I go hunting, I'll use another one of these things. When I go hunting, I assume that I'm going to find something. Other people hunt, and they're going to assume they don't find anything. So it's a whole different mindset.
Right.
And I think the mindset either the mindset will verify where you're coming from, or it'll take away. So I just go the other direction there anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it places unnecessary obstacles and kind of prevents a lot of people from ever progressing towards any answers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know for me personally, I had a sighting back in 2002, and this was a total accident, of course. I'm not taking any credit for it at all. But that was whenever I was really going out there and investigating these things and looking for them on a regular basis. And after that happened, it, in my opinion, opened a lot of doors for me to see different things that were possibly evidence, at least.
Yeah.
Things that I was convinced were evidence regardless, because I now knew these things are real and they're out there. I already have that answer, so I don't need to worry about that anymore. So if they're out there, how are they impacting the environment? What kind of sounds are they making? This really could be a trap because I know they're out here. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. It's the old seeing is believing, or is believing seeing. I prefer believe. I believe they're there, so I'm looking to see it.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I know a lot of people get hung up on it, because, well, if you didn't see a Bigfoot do it, or you didn't, okay, yeah, you're right. We get all those technicalities, but what are we here for? If you're in this, you're in it to learn about Bigfoot. And I think that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. My floor installer, when we first moved into this little place about 10 years ago, we hired a guy to come in and put new flooring in it, and or covering. And I got to talking to him. I talked to everybody about Bigfoot or some related subject. Anyway, and I asked him about it, and he says, "Oh yeah." He says, "I can take you down to Tadenapam." Now, that's where Sarah and Jonathan were here at home a couple, 3 months ago. A guy in a dump truck was driving down the road, and one of the logging roads along the river, and a Bigfoot stepped out in front of him and ran down the road for 100 yards. Huh. Now, that guy there, quite frankly, he's not going to say, "I never saw it. It never happened." Yes, he did see it, and it did happen. And so this guy here, up until that time, the guy that was putting the floor in, I thought, well, maybe he's spinning a yarn here that I don't want to buy into, because he told me, he says, I can go down to Tadenapam, for instance, and this was 10 years before this latest event. He said, I can take you down there and I can show you a Bigfoot tracks anytime you want to see him. And, I took that with a grain of salt. Okay, fine, sure, yeah. And then when Sarah and Jonathan's article came out on that same thing or video, I said, maybe that guy does know what he's talking about. And at the same time, my old buddy that lived up there and hunted up there, he told me about him climbing it's a pretty good sized hill. It takes half the day to get there to the top, called Tumwater, which means falling water in the native. Anyway, he had an incident with one at the top of the hill. At the bottom of the hill was a Tadenapam incident. At the top of the hill, my friend had this incident. So between the two of them, I'm pretty convinced they had incidents, and evidence enough for me. And as I went in a straight line north of that, I talked to two people that had incidents at their place, and the straight line would maybe 4 or 5 miles due north. And one of them had a Bigfoot would come down, and a family come down from time to time and get into their apples and just make themselves known, you might say. Nothing big until another house was built above them. There's only 2 houses on the road, so the other one, and then that changed the dynamics of whether the animal was going to be coming in or out. And anyway, so we got to talking, and she had a garage sale there. That's why I pulled in, and everything. And so somebody else came up there, and we were talking, and she says, "Well, when I was a little girl, this is an older gal. When I was a little girl, my folks who just lived just about a quarter of a mile away had and this was way back. I'd have to hazard a guess based on her age and my age and everything else. It must have been 50, 60 years ago. They had an outhouse off the edge of the house, off the edge of the some corner of the property where it's handy, whatever. And they didn't have a door on it, which out there in the pucker brush, who cares? Anyway, so she was about 10 at the time, 8 to 10. And she says, I went down there, I had to go to the bathroom. And I'm sitting there, and this big hairy guy walked right in front of me, turned, looked at me, and then they looked at each other for a few seconds, and then turned back and walked away. Well, she went up, told her granddad. She says, he was big. He was really tall. And so Grandpa started questioning her about it to find out what was going on. And he says, then it occurred to him, he says, they're here all the time, honey. Don't worry about it. They go through all the time. And it was a Bigfoot. So just everything depends on the situation, who you're talking to. But if I had the time and the money and a situation where I could go right down house to house to house with some kind of an official badge hanging on me so that they wouldn't scare them off, and I'd like to talk Bigfoot, I got a suspicion that that would be a lifelong pursuit all by itself.
Just in relation to what you were saying, I had a couple electricians working on my house one time, and one of them, I was kind of in this position where we were stuck in the same room together, and he's over there working on the outlet, and I'm sitting there, and it's kind of awkward or whatever. And he starts talking, first. And so we're having this conversation, and I find out that he's originally from the southeastern part of Oklahoma, which is known for its Bigfoot stuff. And I just kind of thought for a second. I asked him, I said, you ever run into any Bigfoot down there growing up? And he said, kind of looks up at me, no, and looks back at the outlet and starts working again. And a few seconds later, he says, but my cousin did. Whenever he was fishing, he saw one cross the creek right down from where he was sitting at fishing. And he ran over there real fast, and it was already gone, but he saw the tracks and everything and just went on about his work like it was no big deal, and that's kind of the deal. There's a lot more people who have experienced these things or know someone who has experienced these things than you would ever realize.
Yep. And like I say, they don't get to see it twice. And so the familiarity doesn't happen. They are what they are, and what can you say? I'm a poet. I hate to say that because it scares people to death when you say that. And I think I'm going to end with a poem about. It's called an encounter. If that's okay with you,
Absolutely.
you can laugh with your friends. But this is an encounter that I wrote in 2015, and it goes like this: I heard footfalls on the trail, and though I know he's near, anticipation grips me tightly, and still, and yet, there is no fear. Well over 8 feet tall, 400 pounds or more. I'll know this Bigfoot better before this night is o'er. So many years of hoping to see that lonesome face, to know the myth is real. I cannot thus erase. The moon is casting shadows, and how I strain to see. Is it he among the willows? What else can it be? My heart is pounding lightly. My knees are weak. They shake. I wish a word to utter, but no sound can I make. The moon is full and silver. The light this night is full. I'm in the presence of a legend, and he is in full control. What a great confliction. Should I stay or go? My camera, all but useless. I've forgotten all I know. Still he stands there in the willows, rocking, slowly rocking left and right. What is he thinking on this moon and silvery night? Like others long before me, caught up in the lore, my heart says he's real, and still I need much more. I've no desire to harm him, and I hope he of me, yet to touch and know he's real, and then just leave him be. Behind a cloud it's darkening, the waiting is so long, and with the lights returning, the legend is now gone. Alone I stand there listening to night sounds coming through. Was this mere apparition, or is Bigfoot really true? Consider all the stories, put them to the test. You alone must decide on where your heart must rest. For me, I've heard the footfalls on the night of the silvery moon. I've seen him in the shadows and won't forget him soon.
Jack, thanks for joining me, man. Thanks for sharing the stories. You are a true treasure to the Bigfoot community, and I am very thankful to Jonathan and Sarah for introducing us.
I don't know how much they paid you to say that, but I appreciate it.